Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of SpecTalk. Today's episode is going to be a good one. It's a part two of a previous episode that we had before. So this is the part where we all get to laugh at Dory for his screen sharing abilities, but I think I'm getting this all figured out here. So give me one sec. Let's share that. Let's get us all going here. And here we are. All right, fantastic. So today's episode, we're going to be questioning, like, if you're struggling to keep your standards and specifications consistent across facilities and prototypes, this is going to be a good episode for you. When it comes to schools, hospitals, warehouses, or transit systems, there's a lot to keep track of. In this episode, we're putting owners front and center once again and exploring how owners can define and control their requirements before architects put pen to paper. So if you're responsible for managing building standards on the owner's side or a spec writer eager to understand the owner's perspective, this episode is essential listening. Now, leading you through the adventure today, as always, is me, Dory Azar, architectural consultant and product specialist here at RIB SpecLink. And joining me is the incomparable Alex Baer, strategic account executive and team lead here. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. So today we're just going to be covering a few broad topics, but I'm sure we're going to dive deep into these: how SpecLink can empower owners, how to build consistency across various regions, and how to align expectations with all shareholders. But before we dive in, today's guest is RIB's own David Abrams. And David is a strategic account director with RIB SpecLink. David comes from a career in the AEC industry and brings over 20 years of experience from the practice side of architecture. This is going to be important for today. He is also he has worked through and led multidisciplinary teams in all phases of design and construction for various project typologies and market sectors. David has worked closely with various owners and stakeholders to ensure proper execution of projects while maintaining compliance with stakeholder standards, policies, and procedures. Most recently, David was part of the AE facilities team at an EV auto manufacturer where he focused on developing and implementing facility standards and specifications. That's the other side of the coin here, the experience David's bringing for us today. He also holds professional degrees in architecture and business administration. So, David, welcome to SpecTalk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's good to have you on the part two. I know it's a little delayed. The previous one was back in April, but we're really happy to get you on here. And let's dive in. But before we dive in, everybody who's here right now, I got a little favor to ask. I'm putting together some social media content, and I would love your input. So I'm asking you, if you're watching right now, send me an email. My personal email is on the screen right now. If you have any good advice for young architects, young spec writers, or people considering becoming an architect or a spec writer, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I might put a video together on it with some for some content there. So dory.azar@rib-software.com. I would love to hear from you. So if you get a chance, shoot me some advice that we can share with the next generation. Now, before we get picking Dave. Oh, hold on. I'm clicking the wrong buttons here. Before we dive in, let's just do a quick viewer poll here to get a flavor of who is on with us today. So what is your role? Are you on the owner's facility side, architect, designer? Are you an engineer? Are you a spec writing consultant? And I always like to kind of guess at where these are going to end up. And today is about what this tracks for what we expect today. The bars are moving, and let's wrap it up there so we can get in with David here. So we are about half of us are architects today, and the rest are distributed as you see there. So we're going to close up and get started. David, thank you again for being here. Let's get talking. I love the experience that you're bringing to us today because it's such robust experience from both the architecture side and the owner's representative side. So let's start talking from the owner side of things. Are owners more interested in specs, or are owners more interested in standards? And if you maybe want to explain how you see the difference of that, and then explain how they might be approaching those.
Sure. Thank you, Dory and Alex. So I would say the majority of owners tend to lean towards standards management. There are some owners that do, in-house handle all their own specs, have full AE teams in-house that do that. But from my experience, both on the practice side and the owner side, owners typically either, it's a pretty big spectrum of how they get involved with standards or spec management. But having control over their own standards and managing standards, on the owner side brings a lot of benefit. So, SpecLink, plays a very strong role in being a vessel or an avenue to kind of drive that organization. I would say typically owners, may or, on one end of that spectrum, don't manage anything. They just kind of, onboard external architects, engineers, and consultants, let them run everything, all the
Mhm.
way to, fully managing specs in-house or managing what's important to them. And typically, the way that kind of starts is with Word documents or, a basis of design documents, or kind of identifying what what they want to control, and it's typically experiential things, so it's things that will be recognizable. And if you think about brands, right? If you walk into a certain retail establishment or a certain kind of chain restaurant, where you are. If you're,
Right.
depending on where in the country you may be, if you walk into a place, there are things that are recognizable that are help pushing that brand. So some of those experiential and maybe finishes or lighting or signage or all that stuff kind of enforces the brand and really what they're trying to market. So there's a lot of room in there to control that stuff, and there are also a lot of other side benefits that come along with that.
Yeah, and with that though is those are the internal factors, right? Let's say finishes or things like that. But the other thing that I always found interesting, because I used to work in a at a firm that did sort of prototypical projects across the United States, and the other impacts, whether it's hurricane considerations, earthquake considerations, various code considerations, the odd lead consideration or something like that. How would you explain, or maybe Alex, if you want to, like, how would we explain how SpecLink can handle those things?
Sure. So yeah, prototyping and some redundancy, brings cost savings, brings time savings with project schedules, budgets, forecasting, procurement. So creating office masters in SpecLink, and even you know at a very bare minimum, if you're at an architecture firm, you may grab an old successful project, use that as kind of a boilerplate or jumping off point. But to create Office Masters and SpecLink does allow you to create these potential different prototypes, again, based on geography or location or certain design packages. Something in New York City is going to look different than something in, Arizona potentially, right?
Right,
So
right.
being able to kind of create these separate office masters that align with local codes, ordinances, climate, geography, all that stuff helps build those templates, and then you can leverage those. And it can also tie to the project type. So if I'm designing a full restaurant versus some small cafe, I'm identifying these different space types and building prototype kind of packages around that.
Hmm. Interesting. Alex, are you able to open up SpecLink now, and maybe we can
Sure.
start to show some of the template. Um, did we lose Alex?
I
There he
pushed the
is.
wrong button. Let's try it again.
I've done that today too. So
Yes.
uh, there he goes. Okay,
Try
we'll
that
get
one.
Alex in there, um, and give him a chance to do there. So David, in your experience, what has been sort of I know you said a project in New York would be different from a project in Arizona. In your experience, what would be sort of the two sort of polar opposite scenarios you could experience in building in the United States? I know snow would be a big thing, right? If you're dealing in an area that's got no snow versus some snow. Like, did you ever have to deal with the same building that was in two different areas that were just completely different?
Yeah, I mean, at my, the former place that I worked, I'm not going to mention their name. We had, I'm from the Detroit area, so I was working on a manufacturing plant in the Midwest, and a lot of the designers were coming from California. So there were a lot
Okay.
of design selections that for outdoor construction that was like teak and wood, a lot of wood,
Yeah.
and I'm like, hold on a minute. It's gonna snow. There's gonna be salt and grease from the parking lot, and there were a
Yeah.
lot of finishes, based on climate that just absolutely would not last more than a season, in Michigan or in the Midwest. So that was like, and you only know what you know. So me from the Midwest, I knew right away that these things would never work. So that would be a use case where we would design something that would work on the West Coast, create a prototype, create an office master, create those manufacturers, products, standards, all that stuff, and it would be very different, let's say, from in a lot of cases from something that might be in colder climates. And also leaning into the manufacturers, I mean, there are products and manufacturers that are more available depending on where you are geographically. So I like a 2 centimeter, slab countertop might be standard in the Midwest, while a 3 centimeter might be more standard in, on the West Coast. So then you're getting into cost and lead time and availability, stuff like that.
Right. Excellent. Guys, questions are open right now. So if anybody's got any questions or comments or feedback they'd like to hear, we can go over it. But Alex, why don't you walk us through some of the ways people are organizing their projects in different parts of the country?
Sure. So, and I just would definitely also expand on the fact that, depending on who you're working with, you may have a, certain set, group of architects or engineers that you're working with regularly. So there's that room for, gaps in communication. Even if understand your standards from regional differences, your architects may not. So there's, infinite rooms for miscommunication, which is why, we have, offer SpecLink, and a tool that helps you to manage and refine your masters and make them, specific and keeping them up to date too, so, if you've got, something used in Q1, we've got a lot of owners that, will issue a quarterly, as you can see here, we kind of have an example, but, different quarterly masters for each quarter as things, change, just to make sure everybody's staying on the same page. And that you've got that consistency across the the results for your projects when it gets to the hands of the architect or to the engineer. Again, if you're outsourcing the actual design portion. But yeah, if we go ahead on come into one of these masters. Before we do that too, I also want to mention we do have a new filtering feature. So you have the ability to actually tag and sort by different types of projects. So you may have, for instance, as we've talked about, different regional masters. If you have multiple facility types, you can tag those within the system, different kind of levels or sizes of projects. So all these things can be sorted by when it comes to sort of assembling the guide spec that you share with your architects or engineers, or that you use for your in-house design on the actual project specification. So that's a bit new. Wanted to touch on that, but let's just go ahead into one of these. Let's say that we have a warehouse master here. So, one of the big things with SpecLink, and this is going to ring true for architects, engineers, owners, it is an edit by selection based system. So one of the big, benefits of the program is you're able to do what we call nest in Office Master, where you sort of go ahead and turn on certain parts of the specification and manual that are going to be those consistent design standards, whether they be certain sections or specific materials, certain finishes depending on the location of the project, facility type, all of those kinds of things. So with the SpecLink program, through the edit by selection, you are able to pre-turn on or pre-select those particular design standards. With that being said, once you're inside of the program and you make a copy of this particular Office Master or this particular section, you're going to be able to see, the sort of what we call the nested standards in the Office Master that have been pre-selected, as well as the full master specification, but grayed out, but available in the background. So it's giving you that sort of sharpened pencil and that refined understanding of, what are our lessons learned, what are the types of preferred materials, preferred finishes, preferred manufacturers. But you've also got that full Office Master in the background, to always, keep you thinking and keep you, cognizant of the different options that are going to be available for your project. The other big piece I'd say is so outside of the sort of the nesting and the sort of cataloging of your standards and the visibility to make edits, we also have master notes that you can build into SpecLink. So these master notes that you see here on the left, these are actually, there's two different types. There's a note that's provided by SpecLink, and these will kind of vary across the board as far as sort of what to include when sort of situations, links to reference standards, information about particular products and materials from different manufacturers. And you can make these as advanced as you'd like. So you can have images, you can have hyperlinks, all kinds of different things. And you do have the ability to create your own project note. So that's something that's definitely very useful when it comes to an office master, whether that be to use a certain type of manufacturer for a certain type of project, or maybe, a justification on why we decide to go with this particular type of equipment, because it's standing up well in our projects and lasting longer. Go ahead.
Would you say, yeah, so based on what David said earlier about, let's say there was a wood situation where it works in California, but it doesn't work in New York.
Sure.
Are you finding people are using that notes area to keep track of something like that? Or are they baking it in a different way?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I'd say there's really two ways that people are doing that. One would be the notes, and having that ability to, again, you can add a note. You can say, use, again, we'll just as kind of to follow that example out. Use, let's say, field applied.
Oh, yeah, you're gonna have to narrate that for us. That's pretty small on screen.
Term it aside for wood. In rural areas. Just kind of making something up here, but so you can go ahead and kind of add that in, okay, and then I'll put a little note tag to the adjacent to that particular line or paragraph. So you've got that sort of justification in that sort of corporate memory. So you don't always have to go back and remember why or when you use something specific. It's all sort of cataloged in there. That way you've got that, that direction, that consistency, and a much quicker way to produce your specs. The other piece that I always talk about, and I know that our clients will use a lot, is the tags. So you do have the ability here. We have tagging that's available inside the system. The tagging, I know we've done a SpecTalk specifically on it, but it can be used for things like reporting. But it can also be used for sort of cataloging your information. So you can come in here, you can create tags for maybe a certain type of sector or for a particular client, and you can tag different paragraphs. So again, at a high level, you're able to see when and where, what type of use case you use that.
So David, in a tag-based scenario like that, how would you see that being applied for various things that a project might, or that a company might be experiencing with multiple projects in different regions, or what are you finding people are using the tags for?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could use the tags to identify specific regions or specific kind of design packages that are associated with those regions.
Right.
I think in addition to tagging, because, historically a lot of spec writers came from, using Word and Word documents, or Word Perfect if we go, further back. The ability to, and, I think, Alex, you could probably show this tag, but the ability to put inline notes on a non-print or non-select layer that is right in your face is another benefit that I know a lot of people like to use and may not be aware of. So you can actually put notes right in line that are visible, that are on a non-print or non-select layer.
Alex,
because
could you zoom in a little bit, just to control and scroll wheel, just make it sorry, David, I know I was just to make it a little more legible. So Alex is adding a sort of a user note in there, user line.
Right, and you can kind of make it stand out. You can make it basically note. You can add a note auto number so that it will be available, but it will not format. You can also tag that, and I know that we've discussed this in some of our former spec talks, but you can always make something as non-selectable or non-printing, so that it's going to be available, but not available for selection or print.
Yeah, and that's got the gray dots in the background there.
Correct.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, so there are a few ways that and I do like that, like, not to put my personal bias on it, but as in your face as something can be when you're dealing with this volume of information, right? And let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. But sometimes it's nice to have those things right there, and not in a buried note that you run the risk of missing right when it's right in your face. I don't. I like that. What do you guys think? David? Are you more prone to put it right in front of your face like that, or?
Well, Dory, I talk about spec management, but I often mention people management. So anytime you're dealing with people, that's a whole project in itself. People come with different workflows, processes, baggage, ways of doing things. So I think having all these options is great because it allows firms or owners to kind of decide how they want to use SpecLink and then kind of
Mhm.
align that with what works best. So I like a combination. I think there's a use case for having something critical in your face like that.
Mhm.
But there's definitely internal communication on the user side. From a team standpoint of how that would work.
Yeah, that would get
Sure. And
down to the. Sorry, Alex. Go ahead.
you can always, use a combination too. So of course you could use the inline notes, add, see details, and then add a, note on the left for images, links, further information kind of thing.
All right. So yeah, that's a really neat way of maybe keeping some subtle differences between, let's say, prototypes from region to region. Now, um, what other? I'm trying to think of the other. I just lost a thought that I had. Completely gone. But why don't we talk about the maybe some of the other benefits that SpecLink has for owners, because we do have our fair share of owners that are SpecLink customers themselves, so that they're tracking, with their subscriptions, the things that they need to track. And I know I've dealt with in my own experience here some clients that are tracking sort of basis of design type things. They're not even using it to write. In one that I'm thinking, not even using it to write specs. They're just kind of using it to keep their corporate standards in line and up to date. What are some of the other benefits that owners could expect from SpecLink?
Yeah, so that's a good one, and there's a handful of things I want to talk about here.
Yeah.
Um, like you said, it starts out with Word documents and little kind of thoughts and pieces and lessons learned from different projects, how these things come together, right? Being able to document those and have those in a single source of truth, being SpecLink is definitely a benefit. People aren't going to their, desktops or, laptops or whatever. It's all kind of in one spot. So again, back to that people component, everyone's using one source, which keep things, it's a single kind of dynamic, source. Our spec writers are maintaining all the content, so it's all current. So, I mean, that's just kind of a general benefit. In terms of owner benefits, having these standards kind of established from a bid standpoint when you're onboarding consultants is huge. Um, moving from pre-spec link to using spec link in that kind of scenario, I saw a lot of the bids were tightened up, a lot more bid alignment because we included these standards in our bid packages, distributed
Hmm.
those to the AE consultants, and everything was much more aligned, which helps everybody. It allows the bids to be more accurate. It just, kind of leads to better overall project success. Couple of the other benefits I would say that I didn't realize were really kind of, on the procurement side and facilities maintenance side, and understanding the visibility that identifying these would give us in terms of identifying long lead items and being able to communicate those.
Hmm.
I'll tell you this kind of interesting, quick little story here, if you don't mind. But uh, we
Enjoy.
were I was in the office and we saw a janitor walk by with the janitor cart, and they had probably 5 or 6 different types of soap on this janitor's cart. And we
Hmm.
looked at that and we were wondering, why do they have so many different types of soap, like liquid and foam and different viscosities
Right.
and everything? And what we learned was we were moving through projects so quickly, we were kind of just going with whatever soap dispensers, the engineer was selecting or whatever was available. But what that led to is different soap dispensers in all these different restrooms in the same large facility that had different soap requirements. So it was kind of an aha moment for us to say, hey, this isn't the most critical thing that we need to, standardize, but why don't we just pick a soap dispenser? So from a maintenance and upkeep standpoint, we have one type of soap that we're ordering, and one, that kind of extrapolates to other equipment and rooftop units and so on. So the more that we could standardize, even from a facility standpoint, brought
Right.
a lot of benefit, in terms of maintenance and upkeep. And
Yeah. And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's a clever observation too. Like when you, and I'm sure that scales up, right? This
Yeah.
example was of various soaps, which is important, but let's call it inexpensive in the grand scheme of operating a building. I imagine now if you um, uh, magnify that to larger components of the operations of a facility, especially these are, I think I know the facilities you're talking about. They're not, you know, 1,200 square feet, right? These are
Right.
gigantic facilities. So anything that can streamline the efficiency there, I think any owner looking at these opportunities to consolidate efforts is going to be very welcome.
Yeah, and I mean, just in terms
Sure.
of attic stock and, again, maintenance, again, it wasn't at the forefront of our minds, but it came out as being a huge
Mhm.
kind of, you know, uh, underappreciated or not realized benefit. And one of
Yeah.
the other ones on the procurement side was with, after COVID and supply chain, and, we're still not entirely sure what's available and what the lead times are. We don't want to, necessarily let it fall into the hands of the GC to make some last minute, cheaper decision. So
Right.
what having these standards documented allowed us to do was, on the procurement side, was have conversations with manufacturers and say, hey, listen, this is what's in our pipeline for projects. These are the rough quantities, or here are the plans. Do some takeoffs. These are the quantities of products and materials and stuff that we're going to need at these times. So we really shifted a lot of conversations to procurement and working with manufacturers to make sure that they were actually producing the stuff that we need, so we got it in time for C of O, or for, based on the project schedule. So it really just helped everybody out in terms of, maintaining design intent all the way through, to project execution and construction.
That's great. Yeah, and
Excellent.
I mean, it's always worth mentioning here, of course, with SpecLink, you've got the ability to, share your master. So, a lot of people think of the sharing tool we discussed for the actual project specifications, but you can share as an owner, your master with the contractor or with the manufacturers. You can then ask them with the view comment features. You can ask them questions and verify that their, materials are going to work for the type of project that you're doing. Well, to your point, David, so it can be used to sort of bring those pieces together, get that feedback, get that information, those decisions, jotted down in the software. So you've got your master is going to be prepared to be streamlined in your project and avoid RFIs and change orders and
And the benefits of
controllable
tracking
things
those.
that can be prevented.
Yeah, and the benefits of tracking lessons learned in a dynamic space like SpecLink is super helpful, because if you finish a project and the lighting, maybe the photometric, maybe there was some hiccup or something, and the lighting doesn't exactly look how we wanted. There may be two other projects that already have ordered those light fixtures, but I can
Mhm.
stop the third one and I can say, hey, let's update our spec in the master. Let's correct this light fixture issue and get back on track. So it's this constantly evolving space where we can keep improving and benefiting our standard specs and projects.
That leads
Sure.
me directly into a question that somebody had. It's like, I don't know if you read the question. That's so beautiful. Excuse me. Before we get into that question, I'm going to put another poll out there asking you guys, do you write specs for owners? So I'd be curious to check with the audience here. How many people are on here right now that are actually writing specs for owners? And we will wait for those bars to come in. But yeah, the question that I have coming up now, while we wait for those answers, is related to pushing out updates. So if something started and changed along the way, how can we broadcast that quickly to make it to update it before it happens again? So it's far more eloquent than the way I just put it, but let's share those results here. look at that. We are a tie for yes and no's. No, but I'd like to, and I used to. So we got one person that got out of it. For the people who answered no, but I'd like to, go ahead and ask some questions because I think David's got a ton of experience on both sides of the aisle here as to what architects can provide to owners and what owners are looking for from architects or spec writers. So feel free to ask those questions. But this question came in from Elaine. It's it's a few sentences long, but I think it's worth reading here. It says, can you push comments/updates out to projects that were started from the Office Master? As in, use the master in a way to communicate to folks that have a project in progress that is derived from the master. Example, engineers develop a new concrete mix that causes a change to the master CIP section. Is there a way to push the update out to all the in-progress sections? It's an alert of types that a project level editor can accept or not to be aware of. Alex, can you show us how that would work?
Yeah, well, so right now, I mean, they are going to be separate. We have our office masters and we have our project specification. So, of course, when you make a copy of the master for the project specification, you'll, get all the latest and greatest, changes or refinements to standards or, what materials you use or, different preferences. So that scenario is more so kind of in that interim period when you're already underway in a project and somebody comes and, provides feedback, say from the facility group, go in and you change that into your office master. So right now, there's no direct sort of lineage that will push that particular update from the master to say that the child projects. But I do know that that's definitely something on our roadmap for discussion. So as the way that we're able to push our updates out to the SpecLink updates out to the masters for changes to say a reference standard. There's the idea that we'll be able to, as a user, you can make that change in your master and push that update out as a proposed update to your sort of child project. So that's something that's on our roadmap. It's not quite in the software yet, but it hopefully will be soon. You do have the ability, of course, at the current moment. You can always, if you know your team tightly enough, if you know which group is maybe working on, another project, if you make a change, inside of a master, you could always send that person a comment either in your master or in that project to kind of refer, see change, see update in master kind of a thing.
Cool.
But yeah. Mm-hmm.
So to add to that, because we have what you guys don't see is behind the scenes some powerhouse spec writers that are giving us Eric Ledbetter is giving us some feedback here on Elaine's question. You can update a master, then import from master back into a project, but it will overwrite any changes made from the time the project was started. So that is feedback from Eric Ledbetter on how he handles things like that. There's another comment that came through as well. Steve is saying our firm works with national brands in retail, grocery, and hospitality sector, and we help them maintain prototype templates that allow them or their consultants to site adapt their prototypes into a given city. So I've asked Steve if he could share a little more because that sounds really, really interesting. Yeah, that seems to be a common way that people are doing it. But thanks for highlighting that, Alex, and
Sure.
sharing that answer there. So let's talk about another a thing here. Move on a little bit, David. Let's talk about it from the other perspective now, from the owner's perspective. So for those on the call who are interested in maybe providing services for owners, what are they looking for in an architect when they bring someone on board to help them manage a prototype or do multiple projects for them in various regions? What are some of those identifying? It might not always be that they need a 500 person firm or something like that, right? What are the things that an owner is looking for in an architect?
So, I mean, I would say this is a good opportunity for architects and engineers to kind of guide owners because a lot of the owners I don't think don't realize how much they could benefit from having these standards. I know in my experience on the owner side, like I said, we had a lot of a lot of focus on experiential stuff, and of course, on the engineering side, they were focused on some of the system stuff. But for example, we had hired an outside AE consultant to do a full building shell package of specs for us. It wasn't something that we were super focused on, but something we wanted and needed as part of our standard. So we simply contracted an AE consultant to build specs for a building and shell, knowing that would become part of our standard. So that was one kind of indirect, case where an owner could use an AE firm for something outside of a typical project. But I think there's a lot of opportunity that's beneficial for both the consultants and the owners, for architects or engineers to say, hey, listen, this would be helpful if we had these things identified. It would help us know what you're looking for. It would help you kind of have some ownership over, over what you're doing and what you're looking for, and we could both benefit from it. And some of the collaboration features in SpecLink go a long way to support that. So, in my experience on the owner side, we would mandate all of the AE firms use SpecLink. So that would kind of give this collaboration, open book transparency to where everybody's working in a project. Obviously, visibility is controlled based on, who needs access to what, but it eliminated a lot of time in back and forth reviewing and Bluebeam sessions. And, sure, I'll have this in 2 weeks, but really I'm going to do it the night before. It kind of flushed some of that stuff out. So it really gave a lot of good focused energy into a collaborative environment that really, sped a lot up and maintained good accuracy.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, I mean, the big thing with SpecLink, you create a footprint of a specification that you can use in the future, whether you being the owner, whether you being the architect. So if you don't want to work together, again, as David mentioned, you may want to come to your owner and say, you know what, we use SpecLink. It's a great tool, and we'd love to start to produce, your specifications in SpecLink. So if they've got, a SpecLink license as well, they being the owner, when the architect creates those project specs, you can very easily come into SpecLink and you can basically create an office master and make a copy of that project. So it all kind of comes back to this edit by selection and sort of using more of a building blocks workflow as opposed to the edit by deletion. So you're able to, again, kind of build that footprint that has that sort of mapped out as far as the standards for that type of facility. And then, of course, we're going to continue to push updates into it. So it's never going to fall out of date, which is the other huge issue when you've got, somebody that, spends as much time as they may, if you hire an architect or engineer to create your prototype spec, it's as much effort and care goes into it. It's going to fall out of date. So better to put it in a program like SpecLink where you're going to get those continual updates to your standards, manufacturers' products, and you've got that footprint, the edit by selection. You can add things, remove things, but it keeps everything in a place that everything stays in front of you, and you don't run into things sort of fading away or falling behind or falling out of date behind the scenes.
And thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, David. Go ahead.
I was going to say, back to that kind of spectrum of how owners operate, there are cases where owners have full AE teams, of 20 to 50 to 100, who knows. There are owners that don't have any team, and maybe it's one guy on the facilities team that is trying to manage standards, or anything in the middle. So there are use cases where owners don't have any involvement in standards. They say, hey, I have an architect or an engineer who manages all those standards for us, and that architect's using SpecLink. So it could be an indirect benefit to the owner if the architect has full control over it, or it can be any involvement to where they have a liaison or stakeholder on the owner's side working with the architects. And in a lot of the healthcare work I did on the practice side, I would meet with the owners. They had design teams. We'd sit down. They'd be putting together a DD set. We'd identify their standards, and then I would take that back as the architect, fold it into a properly documented project manual and set of drawings and stuff. So there's a lot of opportunity in a lot of different scenarios where architects and owners can both benefit from SpecLink.
And David, would you say the user permissions probably come into play too? I'm sure, and kind of having more confidence as an owner to have people
For
involved,
sure, yeah,
in the right ways where they feel confident and they're not concerned about somebody muddling with something they shouldn't be, or
right. I mean, we had many projects happening at the same time, and one architecture firm that we had may not have had the bandwidth to handle them all. So we would have one project team doing these projects and one doing these projects, and I didn't need them seeing each other, so I would control their visibility. They would see the projects they were awarded, they would have access to what I needed them to, and so on, and everyone's happy and working. And also the architects don't want to be spread too thin either. They want to have their A team or what working on these projects for the best outcomes.
Steve earlier had shared with us how he is working on national brands and retail for a variety of cities. He provided a little more explanation to his context here that I'd love to read. It says, we write those specifications to apply as broadly as we can for any project in the United States. Once the project in a given city is kicked off, anything unique to that location, such as local codes, energy, materials, would have to be added or updated, but the heavy lift is already done. I'm generating full specs for a grocery client in about 4 hours for each city they go to. Any proto or master updates are done at regular intervals and determined by the client. So that, I don't know how big these buildings are, how complex, but 4 hours sounds like a wonderful amount of time to be getting your specs in order for, and plugging in any interval changes or anything like that sounds like Steve's got a heck of a workflow down. Steve, you're not trying to get that down to 3 hours or 2 hours? What are the goals? Actually, he followed back up as he says, still struggling to get consultants on board though, but those are 25, 26 goals. So let's help Steve reach his goals.
I don't know if he is if currently using SpecLink or not, but that scenario that he just described is a perfect use case for how SpecLink can, save even more time.
Why don't we talk a little bit too, Alex? What other features are you hearing? Because you're in contact with a lot of owners through demos and whatnot. What are some of the things that are really getting them excited as you're demoing SpecLink for them?
Yeah, well, I think it's just the it's the neutral environment, right? So if you have, there's different ways to look at it. There's owners that have no design standards, right? And they rely solely on the architect and the engineer, every project to kind of just put it together and kind of hope it's right. And then you start to get into sort of partially outsourcing and outsourcing your own standards that you can control. So the first really step is to make that decision, that you do as an owner want to have involvement in the actual design standards, because they're ultimately the one that's paying for the project. You're looking at the cost of reducing RFIs and change orders by having a better, smoother delivery and communication. And then, of course, having those resources, as David mentioned, in-house with your own architects and engineers. But once you do have SpecLink, it becomes a neutral environment. So I remember one of the universities I was speaking to, they had just so many issues with they had their own guide specs, but they were in Word, and when they would send them out to, I think they had to go with maybe a competitive bid for architects on every project. So they were dealing with something like 20 or 30 different architecture firms that they had to, were working with depending on the project for their campus. So even though they would send out those guide specs in Word, they were just constantly policing, the specifications, to make sure, what the architect, ended up using their own specs and sort of weaving in the guide spec information. Or going in and having to change the formatting because it doesn't align with the formatting of the actual specification from the owner. So they were just chasing their tails, trying to keep up with enforcement of their standards and making sure everything goes through schematics into construction. So really, again, SpecLink, it takes everything, it puts it on the cloud, it puts it into a neutral environment where you're able to set up the area. And then, you've got the ability, I think, just to kind of reinforce from the functionality side, once you share those master sections of the project, you can also decide, kind of touched on this, but you can choose, who are you sharing this with? What level of access? Do they view only or comment? Can they comment and edit? Are you going to give them the entire project? If it's a door hardware consultant, maybe you just want to give them access to, the door hardware section. So you can really decide, who gets what. And then we kind of touched on this too, but when you're inside of SpecLink, the architect, let's say, receives that tiling section. Okay, so they're going to go in. You're going to have things that are pre-selected by the owner, but you can also lock those things, so you can make them non-selectable inside of a section. So certain architects just flat out can't change something. If there's something you absolutely know you want, you don't want an architect to be able to change it. You can control sort of what level of flexibility that they have. And then everything is going to be monitored. So when they come in to begin to make their edits, of course anything will be monitored with the track changes. You'll be able to see who makes those decisions and when. And then you can decide to accept those track changes, but everything is, you're going to be able to see when you kind of put your first foot forward and you say, this is what the gist of where we want to your ideas and flexibility, but we want to start here. It makes it to where they're not having to go back on the back end and quality control and check the specs to make sure that things aren't missed. And then the other piece again does come back to the comments. So you can come in, you can assign comments. If it's something that's locked as non-selectable, the architect could still make a request back to the owner and say, hey, I think we really should go with XYZ. But it does force that communication up front, so that all parties are involved. There's not a guessing game of who's doing what in the background, and it just forces those decisions to come to a head up front. So again, you get all your decision makers, everybody on the same page, same sheet of music. When you go to construction, you're going to have a lot less again, control. Not everything's controllable, but the things that are controllable in the way of consensus and documentation to review change orders, RFIs, all those things. So the commenting, just a big piece with this, and that again, that neutral environment is a big deal.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. That was a fantastic explanation. I'm going to set up, launch our last poll here. Then I got a question. I think I'd like to, so the last question here is just like to get an idea of who's a current SpecLink user, who's not. If you are, thank you. If you're not and are interested, definitely reach out to anybody you have contact with at RIB. We'll be happy to put you in touch with the right person to set you up with a one-on-one demo and a trial that you can take SpecLink for a ride and see how it would meet your needs. But you can see we got a whole pile of loyal people on this call today, so that's fantastic. Appreciate every one of you guys. The last question I wanted to say is like just talking, Alex had said universities, and it got me thinking about they would obviously be classified as owners, but they're not using, let's say, all the divisions in SpecLink, right? Mm-hmm. They would have a particular interest in some of the more front end stuff and maybe some more random things throughout here and there. How are you finding people, like, is that how the majority of owners are using it, for just sort of like specific sections, or are you seeing the majority of them using it for its full resource of content?
So, if it's for, go ahead, David.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say there's a range. So yeah, universities or municipalities are going to have certain,
right.
If there's a department of, the public works or something, they're going to be focused more on, infrastructure, let's say, or, so there's definitely a range depending on the owner type. It could be very focused on certain, certain content, certain sections, or it could be, if it's all encompassing. Now I'll still say even on the all encompassing side, there's typically still using SpecLink as more of a higher level standards management tool with maybe some, more finite specs for the stuff they want full control over. But there was a refreshing component of being on the owner side where I knew I could pick and choose what I wanted. And at the end of the day, I would hand this off to an architect and they would have to deal with, the rest of it. So that was a nice change of pace.
Whereas, what was that like on the other side of the fence?
Oh, I don't know. It wasn't my problem.
No, I mean, when you were the architect.
Right. Everybody, all the architects know what that's like. So that takes a little more effort and energy to, clean up everything and bring it all together into a nice cohesive package. So it was fun. There were some fun parts of being on the owner side. And I knew what I was causing, and it was kept me going some days. But There was another thing I wanted to mention too, from a performance versus prescriptive based kind of approach. And I learned this a little bit where in some of the earlier projects, we were like, hey, we want this exact plumbing fixture. This is what we love. We tested 20 of them. This is the best. And then all of a sudden that manufacturer has they're on back order. And then we're scrambling. I can't tell you how many phone calls I had with certain distributors saying, I need you to hijack this truck on the way to California. I need that drinking fountain or that plumbing fixture. I don't care what you have to do. So after a lot of those phone calls, were like, hey, let's just, and this is kind of to Steve's comment, let's do these a little more performance based. Maybe there's a BOD for a certain fixture, but let's identify the requirements of what we're looking for. So if we do need to pivot manufacturers based on availability, there's still water coming out of the faucet, or we're still able to use the drinking fountain. So we kind of went in really hard and focused based on design, and then as we learned, we didn't control the world. We had to back off a little bit and lean into more performance based. So you can absolutely go through SpecLink, identify a manufacturer too, but maybe just have more performance based specs in some cases. But
Don't mind
overall,
me.
the owners,
I'm just having visions of you chasing a truck down a highway, or like you in the back of a pickup truck trying to steal a drinking fountain. This.
I mean, I really was
for
on
some
the phone
funny visuals,
telling them I was like, where's this truck? Where is it going? Stop the truck, take this drinking fountain off the truck, and reroute it here. I don't care what it costs. We need this now.
Did the police ever show up to your office, or is that, managed to avoid that?
I actually did have stuff showing up to my house, certain products, just, because it was the faster process. It was interesting. But back to your original question.
What a career.
Right.
You're right. I didn't have the free reign to do that on the practice side. Where on the owner side, it was, there were some fun times. But typically owners will use either, may use focused areas depending on the type of work they're doing or the type of work that they're kind of governing, or, more of a higher level because they know it's going to get handed off to an AE firm to kind of button everything up and fill in the gaps of the other critical stuff.
Sure.
Guys, this was fantastic. I am going to start to land this right now, but let me get back into my screen share here. The funniest part of the whole day, at least my day. Just waiting for it to load up here. Let's do this, and there we go. Can we see David on screen here?
We can.
David? Okay, cool. Thank you. So I want to thank David for being our guest today, even though he does provide long, awkward pauses there. If anybody wants to reach out to David for any elaboration or pick his brain on anything that you may have heard today, his email address is available at the bottom of the screen there. So thank you, David, for being on. I know it's way, way, way overdue, but this was a great episode, and I'm glad we were able to find time to have you on. So thank you for making it.
If anybody has a shipment that hasn't arrived yet and you need things moved along a little bit more quickly, just give me a holler. I'll make it happen.
My packages have been taking a little longer than usual, David. If you could, whatever.
Yeah, mine show up very quickly.
I bet at this point now, with that reputation. You can, I'd also invite you guys to check your inboxes if you are interested in joining SpecLink Labs. That's going to be a collaborative focus group focusing on the future of spec writing, where you will get early access to new SpecLink features, virtual workshops with your industry peers, and all in a webinar-based participation format. They were sent out last week, so check your inbox for that if this is the kind of thing that you'd be interested in. And our next Spec Talk will not disappoint. Our special guest in 2 weeks from now will be Beth Strochan, where we will be talking about formatting your specs for owner and architect requirements. Beth is a highly intelligent, very thoughtful spec writer. So I know this Spec Talk is going to be a real deep dive, and there's going to be some real great information shared. So mark your calendars for this one, guys, because you don't want to miss it. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for being here today. David again, Alex, couldn't do it without you. This is fantastic. Thank everybody for their time. And if you wanted to email me again, like I said at the beginning of the show, that'd be fantastic. Otherwise, we will see you guys in 2 weeks for another episode of Spec Talk. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.